Hi. So we missed St. Patrick's Day because we weren't in school. But I wanted to read one of my favorite St. Patrick's Day stories. It's called Tim O'Toole and the Wee Folk. It's retold by Gerald McDermott. So it's star MAC for Gerald McDermott because the MAC is the first three letters of the author's last name. In a little cottage on a little hill at the end of a little lane in Donegal lived Tim O'Toole and his wife Kathleen. Tim and Kate were so poor they had not a penny or a potato between them. Their children ate porridge for supper, and even the mice were thin from want of food. And the cat wouldn't even bother chasing the thin creatures. You can see how skinny those little mice are right there. Their neighbors, who were poor enough themselves, avoided Tim, for they thought he would bring them bad luck. Things went from bad to worse until one day there was not a crumb or a drop left in the house. "Tim O'Toole," said Kate, "I cannot stand no more of you being poor, and you sitting around bemoaning your fate. You must go out and find work like a decent man and take us out of this poverty." And Kathleen kept after him, and the next morning Tim set out to see if he could earn some wages. Tim O'Toole traveled the length of the country, knocking at every door, inquiring at every farm, trying to eke out a few coppers for a day's work. But there was no work to be had. Finally, when Tim was tired and hungry and could walk no further, he stopped and laid down to rest in the cool green clover at the side of the road. No sooner had he stretched out than he heard the faint sound of merry piping, and lilting voices raised in song and laughter. The strange music was coming from a little hollow on the side of the hill. Tim crept up to the hollow, peered over the edge. There below him was a troop of wee folk, laughing and singing and carrying on. Well, Tim knew for sure his luck had changed, for it is well known that whoever spies the wee folk in the light of day can demand their treasure. Suddenly the music stopped. The little merrymakers were astonished when they looked up and they saw Tim peering down on them. "Hand over your gold," bellowed Tim, trying to be fierce, "and you'll come to no harm." "Oh, have mercy on us, Tim O'Toole," begged the leader of the little people. There was a smile on his lips, and he tried not to laugh. "Oh, you caught us fair, so we'll see you're richly rewarded." Then there was a hurrying and scurrying in the hollow below, and soon the folk handed up a little grey goose. "Here you are, Tim, a goose that lays the golden eggs. Go home straight away, tell not a soul, and you and your Kate shall never want for more." Tim started for home, carrying the goose and feeling very well pleased with himself. Soon darkness overcame him, and he stopped at a farmhouse to ask if he could stay the night. The couple who owned the farm, the Magoons, let him in and set him down by the fire. And Tim began to boast of his great good fortune and the little gray goose that lays golden eggs. That night, while Tim was asleep in the loft, the Magoons decided they could use such a goose as this, and quietly they exchanged it for their own. Tim was none the wiser, and in the morning, happily homeward, carrying the goose, he thought he would bring great wealth. And when he got home, he put the bird upon the table. "Well, is this all you've to show for being gone these 3 days?" asked Kathleen. "Oh, but darling, 'tis no ordinary goose," said Tim. "This one lays golden eggs." Well, the short of it is, they waited a long, long time, and as you might guess, the goose did no such thing. "Oh, they cheated me," howled Tim, and he marched off in a terrible temper to give the little people what for. And when he finally reached their hiding place, he was still angry. "Golden eggs, is it?" cried Tim to the wee folk. "That goose you gave me laid no eggs at all." "'Tis curious indeed," said their startled leader. And then the little man wrinkled his nose and gave a sly smile. "Tim, wait but a moment, and we'll make good your reward." Well, there was a hurrying and scurrying in the hollow below, and a moment later the wee folk brought forth a fine linen tablecloth and spread it in front of Tim. In the wink of an eye it was covered with bounteous food and drink, the likes of which he had never seen before. "Take this tablecloth home straight away, Tim O'Toole, and tell not a soul," cautioned the leader of the little ones. "Then you and your darling Kate shall never want for more." Tim walked merrily home until darkness came on him, and again he stayed the night with the Magoons, boasted to them of his new-found fortune. The Magoons thought it was good fortune indeed, and while Tim slept, they slipped away the magic tablecloth and exchanged it for an ordinary one from their very own cupboard. Tim was none the wiser when he reached home the next day. "Kathleen, me darlin'," he said, "we'll never go hungry again." And with a flourish he spread the cloth upon the table, and, well, of course, it was empty and produced not a drop or a crumb. Kathleen laughed. Tim went into a rage. "The little heathens!" he shouted. And in a flash, Tim was out the door and on the road again. "Stand fast!" Tim called down into the little hollow where the wee folk were gathered. "Ah, 'tis pleased you are not, Tim O'Toole," said the leader. "Could it be that the tablecloth was empty?" And all the wee folk were grinning. "Indeed it was, you scoundrel," answered Tim. "And did you go direct home, as we told you?" Tim O'Toole admitted he had twice stayed the night at the Magoons, and when he heard this, the little people burst into laughter. "Oh, you're a fool to trust the likes of the Magoons," said the leader. "But never mind, Tim, we've just the thing for you." The little people brought up a strange green hat and gave it to Tim. They instructed him to boast of its magic to the Magoons and leave the hat where they could find it. "Then we shall see what we shall see," said the wee one. So a third time Tim tarried at the Magoons. He proudly displayed the magic hat the wee folk had given him. Then he crawled up into the loft and pretended to sleep. He had but laid his head upon the straw when he heard the Magoons stir below. "I wonder what sort of magic it is," said Magoon to his wife. And cautiously he tipped over the hat. Out of the hat jumped 10 tiny men. Each had a little blackthorn club and began to beat the Magoons about the shins and ankles. The couple whooped and hollered and danced around the room, trying to escape the blows of the wee folk. Lay off, begged Magoon. "Tell your henchmen to have mercy, O'Toole." "Give me my linen tablecloth and my little grey goose, and I'll leave you in peace," said Tim, laughing all the while. The Magoons gave back what they had taken. Tim put on his hat, tucked the little grey goose under one arm, draped the tablecloth over the other arm, and headed for home. When Tim arrived, he spread the tablecloth before Kathleen and set the goose down in the middle of it. The bird honked and laid a golden egg. Then the most delectable eatables and drinkables began magically to appear on the table. "Kathleen, me darlin'," said Tim, "we are happy at last." Or so Tim thought. Folks from all parts soon heard that Tim O'Toole had great fortune and crowded in to see the wondrous goose. Their little cottage filled up with neighbors until there was no place left to sit or to stand. Everyone helped themselves to the never-ending supply of eatables and drinkables. "I never knew we had so many friends," said Tim, "but I think it's time that the party was at an end." Tim tipped his hat, and out jumped the 10 tiny men with the blackthorn clubs. They beat the shins and ankles of the noisy crowd, chased them out of the house, and pursued them down the hill. And after that, and the cottage was quiet once again, Tim O'Toole and his family were quite comfortable, you might say. They spent many hours in front of the hearth, sipping tea and chatting and thinking kind thoughts of the wee folk. And for all I know, Tim and Kate are there still in a little cottage on a little hill at the end of a little lane in Donegal. And the thing I like about this is now the mice are nice and fat, but the cat is too fat to chase them anymore. The end.